data reporting type of capability that would be very last generation. David?
Great. Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. It's fun to come down from Orange County and Irvine down to this neck of the woods. It's always beautiful down here, and the rain notwithstanding yesterday. So today I'm going to talk about four things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time about big data and life sciences and healthcare, but I'm going to frame it a little bit. I mean, other speakers have already done that quite a bit. I am going to focus more on life sciences. You've heard about healthcare, but also at the convergence between life sciences, healthcare providers, payers, and patients, and kind of what's going on there. I will talk about why invest in big data. I've recorded some of Will's comments. We can take that at a number of places, but most importantly, it needs to focus around a use case. I'm going to talk about a very specific use case that can drive investments, at least in my clients. Some new models for generating evidence of product value, and really that's what it's all about, is being able to show and prove that your product is more valuable, or at least as valuable as other competitive products in the marketplace. I got some case studies along that. And then wrap up on some implementation considerations, which really apply to any industry, and not just healthcare or life sciences. So I don't need to go into what is big data, why, the earlier speakers have done a good job of teeing up what's happening around us. It's raining data, basically. Either we can try to catch that data in buckets, or we can actually develop take a more systematic, engineering-based approach to how we approach this problem and capture the rain and reuse that valuable asset that's raining down all around us. In healthcare in particular, I'll start with social media. We already heard Experian. That's one of the big growth areas they're focusing on. That's also an area where there's a lot of discussion about healthcare data by both providers and patients about what's working and what's not working. Real world data, we use that to mean data in the everyday real world practice of medicine. Electronic health records are enabling us now, they're becoming more pervasive, to tap into that without dealing with some barriers we'll talk about, to actually using that data for analytics and decision making. The payers, the people that pay for the healthcare, are generating a lot of data and leveraging that data also more than ever before. References were made to genomics, and I'll talk more about that in particular in this part of the country. That's an important area of development and investment here. Costs are going down, and infrastructure for processing it is costs are going down. Understanding is increasing, but we've got a long way to go. Clinical trials data, that's the data required to prove that your product is safe and effective and efficacious. That's growing also in size, complexity, and availability. Most of the governments in the world are starting to force transparency and make that data open and available. And I could talk more about standards because I lead a global standards organization in my spare time when I'm not working at Deloitte in terms of facilitating interchange and interpretability of clinical data, both on the research side as well as in the daily practice of medicine. And then lastly, mobile health, which was the other big area was mentioned. We haven't seen anything yet. I'll give you an example in a minute of what's happening with wearables in terms of generating health data. Just last week, GlaxoSmithKline, working with Metadata, which is a large provider of cloud-based electronic data capture tools in clinical trials, did a proof of concept where they showed that they could produce regulatory compliant data using mobile technology, cloud technology, and a wearable, and they were generating 18 million data points per day per person that was involved in this particular study. They were streaming up 4 gigabytes a day up into the cloud and processing that in a regulatory compliant manner. On the genomic side, are you aware that most of the technology to do next generation sequencing in the world is developed and produced right here in Southern California between Illumina and Life Technologies, which was acquired by Thermo Fisher. They're the world's leading producer of next generation sequencing machines. And I'll give you some more examples of what that means next, the good news and the bad news. It will transform medicine someday. We're not at that point in time yet because the science has got to catch up with the technology, quite honestly. We're generating more data than we know what to do with it. And it's complicated data. The data that comes out of these machines has to go through many stages of filtering and processing and quality control checks, still involving people. It's not fully automated. To get down to something that can be interpreted clinically, medically, to help you really come up with actionable information as you're dealing with that patient and making a collaborative decision about the patient care. So what does that mean in terms of data? Typically, a whole genome sequence produces about 200 gigabytes. And this is a compressed data that's gone through the first filtering process. So you can imagine if you're dealing with a small study of just 10 to 20 patients, you're generating about 4 terabytes of data. And that doesn't include, that's coming out of this part of the pipe. That doesn't include all the downstream, both disk space that's required, as well as supercomputing, crunching of that data, and making sense out of it. With that compute parallel processing that goes along with the data storage. So we're dealing with quite an impressive amount of data. As we make progress, here's an example of what they call a pipeline. That usually is described as a pipeline from the sequence machine that's taking the samples and going through all these stages of filtering and analysis to get down into something that you can actually begin to visualize and do something with. But what's missing from here is the integration of the clinical data, either from a clinical trial or from an electronic health record. Because the genomic data alone doesn't really tell me what to do for particular patients. I've got to integrate the genomic data, that's called phenotypic data, to make sense out of that. But we're going to see some very disruptive and rapid changes. Our friends at Google are very interested in healthcare. Just 2 weeks ago, in Madrid, Spain, at the Big Data Spain conference, a Google developer had 30 minutes to talk about what he was doing with respect to using some of the Google Big Data tools on genomics. So how did he choose to tell the story? In the process of a 30-minute presentation, he showed that with one click, he could set up a Hadoop cluster. He could load data while he continued to talk about what's happening in the industry. He could do some ETL processing on that data to get it into a form that could then be used by the BigQuery tool, which comes out of their Dremel software platform at Google, and start to query that data. They used open data from the Personal Genome Project at Harvard, 174 people's whole genome sequence. It was about a little over 400 gigabytes of data. And he was able to start not only load the data, transform the data, start doing queries on the data, and show the results of those queries and modify those queries in terms of finding people with particular genes or variants of genes right there, real time, in the 30-minute talk while we were discussing this. That included the setup of the Hadoop cluster to the data processing and query. So get ready, fasten your seatbelt. It's coming, but how many of those Google developers are there available to us in our industries? That is keep that question in mind. So now let's transition into talk about a use case. Why should I even think about investing in big data? It's critical to focus on relevant data. Before I talk about this, let me ask, if you're not in healthcare and life sciences, you're consumers of healthcare and life sciences, right? So if I'm a biopharmaceutical company and I've got a new product, how long does it take from my idea to actually get that to patients on the marketplace? How long does it take? Years? How many years? How many years? Yeah, you've been in the industry, you know. Currently it's running 10 to 12 years on average. And how much does it cost?
1.5 billion.
Well, everything's happened so quickly. Just this week, Tufts Institute that does research in the drug industry produced their latest estimate of 2.6 billion. Now, even if they're off by 50%, it's still a lot of money. So it takes time and it takes money. So anything you can do to start to shorten that process becomes important. But what's impressive and important to understand is all the hurdles you have to jump through to get to the patient. Your product, whether it's a device, medical device, or a pill, or drug, etc., to the patient. First of all is regulatory approval. That used to be the biggest hurdle. I had to do my clinical trials and demonstrate safety and efficacy. But now that's not enough. I've got to demonstrate to the payers, and in other countries outside the US, the governments have health technology assessment boards that are also need to answer certain questions. Is the benefit and the risk worth me paying for this, and how much should I pay for it? So reimbursement has become really not sufficient. But then I still don't have my product in the marketplace, since most all of these products require prescriptions. It's a prescriber, typically a physician, but can be other medical professionals. So I've got to weigh what's the performance of this product relative to other alternatives for this particular patient, and I'm making that decision. And then there's the patient as the payer. I don't know in your health plans, but the amount of out-of-pocket costs that I'm having to pay keeps going up and up. So the consumer, the patients are having to pay more and more for their health care. So I still am not there, because not only do I have to pay more, I'm coming into my physician much more well-informed, right? Patients are coming in armed with internet information. So it's a debate oftentimes with the physicians, not just do as I say, but help me understand why I should take this particular product versus another. But all of these, to get over all of these hurdles, we're just talking about evidence. To make those decisions, to get over that hurdle, I need evidence of the value of that product from different perspectives. So where does that evidence come from? What are the facts? What's the data to support this? This next slide, don't worry, it's a typical, very dense word slide. This is, if you're with Deloitte, you've got to do at least one slide that you can't possibly read in 60 seconds. But the point is, it's important to know that those life sciences companies that can start to develop a way to systematically and programmatically gather this evidence across all those perspectives I talked about, dealing with real-world evidence, will be able to be rewarded. So that I've got to build organizational capacity to do that. It's not, I can't just say, for example, I need to do Hadoop because Google and Facebook and Yahoo and everybody else does it. That's not going to solve my problem. I've got to have a planned and thoughtful approach and strategy for doing this. From the regulatory perspective, that's creating a lot of pressure because they're also demanding more and more evidence of benefit and risk. Here's an example for Kanda-san, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, who leads the PMDA, which is the FDA of Japan, talks about the continuous and comprehensive benefit risk evaluation of products. Not just getting them to patients, but continually reviewing them. And they're setting up mechanisms to bring in electronic health data from a whole network of medical centers in Japan, in addition to the research and clinical trial data that the sponsor companies captured, and analyzing that on a continuous and ongoing basis. And so guess what? The sponsored pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies are also having to tap into those data streams and understand those in a proactive way as opposed to just a reactive way. But it's more complicated because each country, here's an example, you don't have to get into this in detail, each country, even though European Union, for example, might approve a particular drug for use to say it's safe and effective, every country has a different health technology assessment board that you also have to show evidence to get it actually into use and paid for in those different countries. Here's just 9 examples. There are more countries than that, obviously. But what's happened as a result of this is it's created this incredible, incomprehensible even, set of frameworks, quantitative methods, metrics, and estimation techniques and prediction techniques about how do you assess the benefit, risk, and utility of products. So how in the world do I navigate through that? Well, a friend of mine at GSK, I also have to be at GSK, she just said pick one. Start somewhere, don't sit back and wait for somebody to say here's the single answer. But let's just pick one. And they picked something called BRAC, which is the Benefit Risk Action Team. Came out of the work by the American, actually, PHRMA, the Pharmaceutical Research Manufacturers Association. The reason I'm showing you this is just to get a sense for the type of evidence and data that companies need to capture. And to try to keep it simple, because obviously we're talking really complex stuff. So it's about benefit risk. Benefits come in different categories. The risks come in different categories. And there are various outcomes that I'm wanting to capture on the right-hand side to be indicative or measurements of those outcomes. That's all you need to know. But what's happening is companies they have to create the regulatory dossier to get approval by the regulatory authorities. Now they're creating value dossiers in parallel to help figure out what's my plan for evidence throughout the whole life cycle of the drug. Then once they get that data, they're developing very simple visualization tools. This is not rocket science. This is something you can do in R, SAS, Tableau, almost any of the tools that are out there. That's not the hard part. This is just for clarity of understanding what favors my drug, what favors a competitor's drug. But what